what they have said and how they have structured what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to change gears another way and take the great risk of telling a joke. There's somebody in the audience I'm going to blame if this doesn't work. The only defence is that almost everything I'm about to say in that joke is true. 3 American generals walk into the officers' club at Pine Gap. And one of them, who is Admiral John Lung Aquilino, the head of Indo-Pacific Command, who controls the US forces, the force projection capabilities in particular throughout the Pacific. And he looks around at that and says, what's really extraordinary is this is just a really suitable piece of real estate. It's really quite amazing when he looks around. The second general, I should say, General Charles Tuna Moore, these are real people, by the way, and they did meet at Pine Gap, head of Cyber Command, or actually, precisely deputy head, looks at all this secret National Security Agency equipment lying around at Pine Gap, just ready for offensive cyber operations out of Pine Gap towards China, and says, it's amazing, isn't it? It's amazing how all this stuff is given to us by these cooperative natives before we even ask them to do it. Well, and then comes the third admiral, or third general, General James Dickinson, the head of Space Command, and that's really important these days, as we know, climbs up to the top of one of the giant radomes, looks out to the north and just says, location, location, location. And he really did. I mean, look, climb the radome, that part's alive. And I think that's really a point. This really did happen. These guys came to Australia, they met in Sydney, and then they off to Pine Gap, where the serious work was being done. What I really want to talk about quickly, and I better be quick about it, is really, I'm putting it under the heading of, can Australia manage strategic risk? Abby's given you one very clear picture of that. I'm pretty sure David's going to give a very rich version of it as well. But I think this is a really extraordinary time. We know there are 4 great sources of strategic risk that Australia has to deal with, and of course hasn't a clue about it. The first one, Abby made very clear, is the United States. The second is China. Not China, the fantasy of racist Australian memories about China coming to get us, but China, the China bomb that we know about, which is going to be extraordinary. The third is climate, and we really are beginning to go backwards there. For a little while it looked like we were making progress, but we are not. And in Australia it's very serious, in America it's catastrophic, and even in Europe it's now wavering very seriously. That's to say nothing about the rest of the world, which is put in the category of suffering. Climate change. All of these, those 4, have political, military, economic dimensions, and of course for our life world as a whole. It's too soft to say environment. So can Australia, the kind of Australia in the parliament that David sits in, to his great difficulty, can Australia deal with it? I mean, that's not usually the way peace movements talk about strategic risk. By strategic, I don't just mean military. I mean everything that directs the system, that affects those politics, those economics, the military, and the life world that we all live in. War abounds at the moment. It is stunning just to casually look through the media, even if you don't have to search very hard. I start with Gaza every day, I start with Iran every day, I look at Ukraine, I look at what's happening on the Korean Peninsula, I look at what's happening in the Horn of Africa, in Yemen, and of course I think about the real possibilities of war between the United States and China, by miscalculation, by intention, whatever way. It's not unreal to think about that. I mentioned the China bomb. That's used in lots of ways today, but I want to draw it, it's particularly important for Australia, because we have enormous difficulties talking about China. Kelly quoted some of the data about the shifts which are beginning to happen around the world, courtesy of Mr. Trump, in terms of the pulling apart of automatic support for the United States. But there's a great deal more to be said about that. I think that China is an extraordinary country. It's not just a story of growth, which is pretty obvious. It's not just a story of extraordinary innovation, both political and economic and industrial. Look at the AI contest now between the United States and China. I mean, it's a kind of game, we kind of think, except it has existential consequences. But what's really important is the way that China is dealing with it is very different from the capitalist version in the United States. Can the PRC, and this is political risk for them, strategic risk for us, can China manage the twin risks of the inequalities that are being generated by that fantastic growth? And also, can it manage to avoid war? And of course, that's not entirely a matter of choice for them. And this is extraordinary. The idea that everything that China has done since 1949 could be wiped out by the wrong choice or by the Americans, who of course have a fantastic nuclear dominance over China. Chinese can build some more nuclear weapons, but that's not the story really that's got to happen in terms of that inequality. But for Australians, the most important part may not be obvious to some people who come from other countries, but it's the deep Australian pathology about China. Whether an Australian government, indeed all of us, can in fact overcome the fear of China that arises not from any deep knowledge of Chinese wickedness of empires past. They come and go, some good, some disastrous, whatever it might be, plural empires, but rather from a very deeply rooted cultural denial about China, rooted in the fact that the English invasion of China, or the 2 centuries that have followed since that English invasion of Australia, those 2 centuries from 1788 onwards coincide with the only period in recorded history when East and Southeast Asia, and by extension the Australian continent, have not been within a Chinese sphere of influence. That's not a disastrous future, it's a future to be managed, however it comes. And I look to countries like Vietnam, which have learned to come to terms with living with a China next door. Can our governments imagine a world where we could live securely in a Chinese sphere of influence? But no, that gets translated as to really dominance and imperialism. Can we work out how to balance risk and opportunity? The American response to all of this has been basically catastrophic. Basically, let's start from the forced posture agreement signed by Julia Gillard and President Obama. I'm sorry to say this about Gillard, but it has been catastrophic and far worse than we imagined for a very, very long time. How are we going to do this? That FPA coincided really with the beginning of the end of the Obama period. Trump won, Biden, was there a difference? I'm not sure. And then Trump too, yeah, there was a difference then. And this is extraordinary that we are seeing this at the moment. And we are seeing the American response flowing from Obama's time onwards. Remember the Pacific pivot? Well, it didn't work out quite like that. It became a Pacific avalanche of rebuilding in bases from Japan, South Korea, Okinawa, Guam, the Philippines, and of course Australia, and David will say pretty much more about that later on. Trump is dissolving the European alliance with America. That should be no comfort because location, location, location. They love Australia. We are, as David said beautifully on the boat today, just in the right place, far enough away for them to be able to mount their forces to attack China, but not so far the Chinese can easily attack us as the way they can Guam and Yokosuka and Busan, for example. Australia is locked in, path dependence, as sociologists call it, in all the ways we've been talking about. We know about Pine Gap, Northwest Cape, the DARC facility, the Deep Space Advanced Radar capability just south of Northwest Cape now. Hugely important innovation in enabling space warfare. That's at least as important as the nuclear capabilities of the bombers they're going to put at Tindal and in a couple of years on the submarines that will be coming to Stirling. They are American bases. Australia has some access. Oh, we own them. That's great, isn't it? But we don't have any influence. We have access to them. And then there's a whole raft that I'll be talking about tomorrow in the workshop of Australian facilities with US access, US military access, US corporate access. Now, corporate's really important because we're not talking about some small company. We're talking about the biggest armaments companies in the world, bigger than many countries. And if we change the adjectives and talked about Australian bases with Chinese corporate access, I think we know what the answer would be. In other words, just because it has the words trusted partner written on the contract, it doesn't really change the problem. So Australia is locked in all sorts of ways. I want to just finish it up. I'm going over time, so I'm just going to finish by really talking about what we need. IPAN, Independent Peaceful Australia Network. How do we manage what is an accelerating, a rapidly accelerating militarisation? American auspiced. The sociologists, I have a confession, that was me a long time ago, talk about dependent, alliance-dependent asymmetrical militarisation, because it is asymmetrical. We can have half of the people running Pine Gap, but if we don't have a voice in what it does, wrong way round. A lot of that. And it's getting worse and worse. In the work I'm going to talk about tomorrow, it's been stunning to go through 160 Australian defence facilities, and a very large number of them find that American access. And that, combined and facilitated by, in the case of the corporates, the Australian government spending phenomenal amounts of money, extraordinary amounts of money, not just AUKUS, we keep hearing that, was it 348, 368, whatever fantasy figure it was, but it doesn't know. Oh, violent guy. Another extraordinary streams of money. And the important thing for IPAN to actually be aware of is that that money, most of it, of course, it goes to Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Dynamics, the primes, the defence primes. But, as particularly Kelly and Michelle Fay have shown us in the case of the F-35 supply chain, there are large numbers of smaller Australian companies which are building their business models, quite literally, around plugging into that. And that creates a political constituency which will work against everything that we are saying and we are talking about. I think that there have always been empires. I think one way or another there always will. I'm not a great believer in historical progress, but I am a great believer in historical changes. The two constants of empires, one, they will sometimes be there. The second constant is they will pass. They may not pass today, they may not pass in our lifetime, but they do pass. And the important thing, and this is where I come back to the name of IPAN, an independent and peaceful Australia. Can an Australia, a government which is in, putting it mildly, not just political disarray, but as David has been telling us about on his emphasis on the corruption in defence, in terms of the extraordinary lack of oversight of this defence spending. Can an Australian government imagine a way where there's a pathway to resist, to manage risk? I know that sounds very managerial, but the revolution won't happen tomorrow, so what do you do in the week before the revolution? Get ready for it, that's right. And make sure the government wakes up. And to search for that pathway, it will not be obvious to autonomy and to sovereignty.